clients is Blue Cross Blue Shield. It's crazy that we ended up in this venue. We're doing work for Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield in New Jersey, and we're doing JHipster for them in New Jersey. So it's a real thing. So I put in the title 30 minutes or less, but that's when I start the demo. So don't start the timer yet. First, let me tell you a little bit about it. But my promise to you, if I can't deliver in 30 minutes or less, everybody here gets free JHipster. So I work for Ippon. We're a consulting company. We do Java, we do big data, we do cloud DevOps work. We don't do .NET, and we don't do closed source for the most part. And we were originally started in Paris, France, and the creator of JHipster works for us. He's our Chief Innovation Officer, Julien Dubois. He lives in Paris, and he's the one who started all this JHipster business. So he's basically, his full-time job is just managing JHipster. Even though it's open source, they allow him to do that, so it's pretty cool. So the next question is, so who here are actual engineers, developers? Okay. What about managers? Okay, cool. What about, anybody here drive a Tesla? No? Okay. I was just checking. We have a couple of our CTO, CIO clients, they drive Teslas, so we just started thinking that's our target market. If we can find people driving Teslas, I'm going to get you my card. Okay, so since most people have not even heard of JHipster, I'm going to start where you normally start, which is, what is JHipster? And I'm going to give you a little caveat here. I'm not going to really go into a full overview of exactly what JHipster is here. I'm going to demo more on the microservice side. JHipster actually started as just a pure monolith application generator, and only in the recent years has it actually moved on to microservices. But I'm not going to go into all the details of how JHipster works. I'm really going to focus on the microservice part. If you want to know more, we can probably arrange something and do another talk that's more about JHipster core and all the pieces involved. But like I said, it's an application generator. The main components are Spring Boot on the back end and Angular on the front end. And now it's Angular 4. Started off AngularJS, Angular 1, but now it's Angular 4. You can still choose to use AngularJS, Angular 1 if you want to. So part of the deal with it being an application generator is it's going to ask you some questions. And the cool part of being a generator is, based on those questions, it generates the app differently. So you might say, well, because maybe the parallel to that would be to have like a Maven archetype or something like that. Why do you need a generator? So maybe there are some things that are not compatible. So you can choose between which one of those you want and get that generated piece. I don't know how you do that necessarily unless you have a lot of parameters on some sort of other archetype or something like that. So other people ask about, is it mean IO? And that's another generator type stack, but that is more front-end based. So that's got the Angular, but on the back end it's Node. Okay? So it uses Java on the back end. And then there's also this Spring Boot initializer. You may have heard of that. So you can go to that site and you can get a Spring Boot app and running quickly, and you can kind of check off the dependencies you want, but there's no front end. So that's kind of the big difference. And then another question that comes up a lot is, why does it not support React? Or insert your favorite tool, right? And the answer is, it's just impossible to support every tool that's ever invented. That being said, we are actually going to support React in our next version. So, but the point is, there's this thing called a marketplace, which is kind of a weird name because everything is free. But everybody can write modules and sub-generators for JHipster and put them on the marketplace, and other people can use them. So if there's something, say you're into, you're like, what about Ionic? Why doesn't it support that? I believe there's somebody who's written an Ionic sub-module. Now, the quality of it, I don't know. But somebody out there has written that and put it on the marketplace for you to use. So that's an option. If you want to add something to the tool, you can do it that way. You don't have to actually commit to the core. So what happens is, it got to the point where it was just too much to keep having everybody commit more and more tools to the core of the product and then have to be able to test all of those different options. Because basically testing is a nightmare. You have to test every combination of every choice that you can make when you're generating an application. So it gets to be crazy, the permutations. So what are some of the options that JHipster gives you? On the server side, just these, that's all, just a few. So there's a lot of different choices, and they keep adding more and more and more. So if you want a database backend with JHipster, you have a choice. Do you want to use MySQL? Do you want to use Postgres? You can use Oracle. The only caveat with Oracle is Oracle's driver is not technically open source, so they can't bundle it with, so you have to get that separately and bring it in and use it. But it does support Oracle, Microsoft SQL Server, and then it even supports some NoSQL databases like Mongo and Cassandra. So there's some other tools here. I'm not going to go into all the details. It does support also TimeLeaf. The main way the app is generated is a single page app with Angular, but you can do server generated pages with TimeLeaf if you wish. I don't know anybody who's doing that. Then the client side, here's the choices that you have on the client side. And some of these things are more Angular JS related, and some are more Angular 2 or 4 related. So some things have kind of gotten out of style now. I guess Gulp was the big thing for about 5 minutes with Angular 1, and then now nobody's using it for Angular, using Webpack. So, and Yarn is the package manager, so NPM, if you know about that. Now there's Yarn, which is faster. Hard to keep up with it all, but so we have, there's some testing. Karma is used for unit testing JavaScript, so there's support for that as well. And then the last thing you want to do after you generate your application is you want to deploy it, right? So there are a lot of options to deploy. There's sub-generators that come with JHipster that allow you to easily deploy to these different cloud type environments or to Docker containers. That's what I'm going to show tonight is Docker. But you could also deploy it to any other cloud, of course, but these are just handy ones that you can just say, hey, deploy my app to AWS, and it'll just do it. So. Okay, I don't know how many people here already probably know what microservices are, but I'm going to go ahead and include it here in case you don't know what they are. And I have just kind of a basic definition. I'm not going to read it to you, but from Martin Fowler, what microservices are. I'm currently using microservices with my current client, which is one of the larger banks. And it is working, but it's not without its flaws, right? It has its own issues. But the thing that I like the most about it is we have a very large project. We have over 50 engineers on the project, but we have them broken up into teams that can kind of work for the most part independently of each other. That's the big win. Instead of everybody, we even have our own little repos and everything for our microservices. Instead of everybody in one big code base. That brings problems when you need to communicate between the two. You need to be very set on the contract and how you're going to do that. And are you going to use messaging? Are you going to just try to make HTTP calls? What are you going to do when you need big chunks of data? So there are a lot of challenges, but I like it for the most part. And we also have, at the current client I'm at, we have the you build it, you own it type culture, which is, so you build the microservices and you deploy the microservices to production and you support the microservices in production. And that's a big key, is that really encourages you to get your stuff together. So I like it, but that's basically what microservices are about. There's also where you can, since you've broken your app out, you can scale it independently, which is a nice feature, and I'm going to actually show that off with Docker. So this is a architecture type diagram of what JHipster builds for you when you generate a microservice application. So it's a lot more complicated than when you just do a monolith, which is really going to be just one block. So here you have, basically the two main components are your microservices, of which you can have many different types of microservices as you want, and your gateway, which is your front end into those microservices. In JHipster, the gateway has a Zool proxy that actually will route, kind of like an API gateway effectively. It's going to route your requests into the appropriate microservices. But there's also some user access control built into the gateway. And what happens is when you generate the gateway application, you can actually generate CRUD screens for your microservices automatically in Angular. So if you create a database entity say you create a product and it has a couple attributes. When you generate the gateway, you say, hey, I want to generate the same thing. It'll generate the front end, Angular screens that do create, read, update, delete on that. So you won't probably use those as is, but they're great models to start with when you're building an application. Because in the end, that's what you're really trying to do, right? Read stuff from the database, change it, and put it back. On the JHipster console is pretty much the Elk stack. If you haven't heard of the Elk stack, that's Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana. Elasticsearch is an index, Logstash is a log forwarder, Kibana is visualization. So a lot of people use that completely outside of the scope of this, just for centralized logging. So you have like 50 servers and you want to bring all their logs into one place that you can actually look at the logs together. You could use the Elk stack for that. Some people use Splunk as a competitor. So the other last piece over here on the left is the registry. And the JHipster registry is pretty much using, and I'm going to go into more detail about these products or the open source products, but a lot of them are from Netflix. Uses Eureka Server for discovery, and it uses Spring Cloud Config. Or you can choose to use Console, if you've heard of that. That's a HashiCorp product. That's also open source. And the idea with a Git repo there is your configuration is centralized in a Git repo instead of being distributed with every single microservice and gateway. So we'll go into a little bit more about those. So I'm going to start a demo. All right, so I'm just going to start from complete scratch, so you know that I haven't done anything ahead of time, right? What I'm going to do is I'm going to start a directory called catalog, and I'm going to make a catalog microservice, okay? So all I have is an empty directory here, and I run yo JHipster. So JHipster, I didn't mention, is a Yeoman generator, if you're familiar with Yeoman. So if you ever want to write a generator, Yeoman is one of the most popular tools for generating applications. So you have choices here. If you monolith, is kind of like the way JHipster started, and now we're going to do an actual microservice application. You can choose the name of your application. You can actually choose a port. I'm going to take the default, which is 8881. You can change the package name. I'm not going to change it just for simplicity's sake. You can decide here if you want to do JHipster registry for discovery, or you want to use console, or maybe you have some other product you want to use, so you don't want to use what JHipster provides. Security, JWT is the default. The other options, there's a Keycloak, which is brand new. So I don't know if you guys have heard of Matt Rabel. He's a guy who speaks a lot of conferences and things. He's a big JHipster guy, but he works for Okta, and he worked on the Keycloak implementation very recently, and so that's a new thing. And then we have OAuth 2, and there's a separate server you can get to work with OAuth 2. I'm not going to do any of that. That would be too much for the demo. So this is where you get to decide what kind of database you want to use. I'm going to do a SQL database, and I'm going to use MySQL. But you can see there's different options here. And if you wanted to use a database that wasn't here, it wouldn't be that hard. Really, you're going to go to config for the most part and change the config. So for development, you can say, oh, I don't want to actually use a real database. I'm going to use more like a H2 disk-based database. You can do that for development if you want. I don't like to, because sometimes H2 doesn't quite support all the exact same things that a normal database does. And second level cache from Hibernate, it's highly recommended. And the default is to use Hazelcast for distributed cache. If you do a monolith application, we actually recommend EHCache. So that just has to do with the strengths of the tools. And they're open source. So. And I haven't even played with Infinispan. I don't even know what that's about. So I'm a Maven guy, but if you like Gradle, that's an option. And this is where you can add some more pieces to the puzzle. You can actually say, I want to implement a search engine with Elasticsearch. So separate from the alt stack, I want to have a search engine built in. So what it will basically do is every time you save some information to your entity in the database, it'll also save it to the index, and you can use that to search. I'm not going to do that for here. And there's a new thing now too where you can actually use the Swagger code gen to do your API first development instead of doing it the way I'm going to show you. And there's another thing too I haven't played with, which is messing around with Kafka. I have played with Kafka, but not with JHipster. There's, because this is French, they care about internationalization, which is cool, because a lot of times people over here don't even build that in. So it's a first-class citizen. You say, what is the language that you want as your native? And then you can add, and there's so many, there's a lot. People just keep adding languages to JHipster. Pretty cool. So I'm not going to add any. I don't speak any other languages, unfortunately. And for testing, you can also use Gatling, which is a performance testing open source tool, if you ever heard of that. And Cucumber is acceptance testing. So it'll generate that kind of stuff for you too, but again, for time purposes, I'm not going to show that stuff. This is what I was talking about with the marketplace. So you can actually install something from the marketplace right here if you want to. So if there's a piece that you need that's not part of core JHipster. So after you answer all those questions, it generates an application. And what it's going to do is going to generate your application. It's also going to generate a bunch of unit tests and things like that. So the first thing you might want to do is just do Maven test. And that's going to run all the unit tests. And what happens is whenever you generate a new, and I'll show you the entity in a second. So, okay, I need to do something. I need to talk to the database. I need entities in the database. Whenever you create those with JHipster, it also creates unit tests for them. So, and the code coverage is really good on the generated applications. This only takes a few seconds. So the next thing we want to do is, okay, we tested. Oh, actually, I did that ahead of time. First, I wanted to add the entity. So, of course, the default app, when it generates, should pass test, right? So I'm going to add an entity. And the way you do that, you can do it one of two ways. You can do it from the command line, or you can use this cool tool and it's called JDL Studio. So this tool allows you to make an ERD type diagram, and there's a DSL that goes along with it over here. So you can build all your entities here one time and import them all at once. So if you had a lot to do, that's what I would do. But for our demo, I'm going to do command line. I'm only going to do one for simplicity's sake. But just that's an option. So when you do it from command line, you can see how, you'll see in a second how when you do it from the command line, it would get kind of old if you're doing 50 of these. You know, one or two, and it's fine. So say, oh, you're doing a product, you want to add a field? Yeah, I want to add a field. What's the name of your field? Name. What type is it? String. Do you want to add validation? So you can add, is it required, minimum lengths, things like that. I'm not going to do that right now. I'm going to add another field. Yes, description. String. No validation. And one more field. I'll call it price.
Can I feed the text file?
I'm sorry?
Can I feed the text file instead of typing in, answering these questions?
Yeah, that's what the JDL Studio is over there. So you make that file. You make a file that looks like this, and you do it for all of them, and then it basically just skips all this command line.
Is that JDL something you can use as your source and then modify it, and it's kind of like a Jenkins build that generates every time you change it?
We'll have to talk about changing things. It's not quite as easy as just after you make this and you generate everything, just tweaking this and running it through again. Especially if you've made changes. And actually, that's one thing I meant to mention is the first thing I always encourage you to do as soon as you do your first generation is check it into Git or some repo, right? And get your baseline in. And then that way you always have that to go back to. One of the hard parts about a generator is our upgrades. You know, I generated an app, I've worked on it, now a new version's out. How do I do that? Well, there is an upgrade path, but it's pretty much comes down to diffing the files, because we don't know what you've done after you generated the app, and I can give you tips on how you want to modify things. Like there's a user entity that comes with. Well, instead of modifying the user entity itself, make a one-to-one relationship to another table and put your new stuff in there. That's going to help you a lot more when the upgrade comes, and if they change user entity, you're kind of insulated from that. So there are little tricks like that, but it is kind of the problem with the generator. That's one way to use JHipster. Generate your app and forget about JHipster ever existed and say thank you very much and move on and never worry about it again. Or kind of try to stay within these parameters so that when upgrades come, you can try to take them in. So price is big decimal, no more fields. And you can also add relationships in here. So you can do one-to-manys, many-to-manys, things like that. A lot of times people will ask too, well, I already have a database design. How do I import that into JHipster? And the answer is there's no real easy way to do that. So what I have done in the past is I've actually just pretended like I started from scratch, and I just match it to what I have. Because you can't like reverse engineer. Now, Julian Dubois says there is some company who has come up with some solution where they actually try to reverse engineer the database and get you to this point, but that's somebody else doing that, so I don't know much about it, but that's what I've done. I'm just gonna say, oh, what's your ERD? Okay, I'm gonna just go ahead and do a JDL Studio to match up with that ERD, and then pretend like I'm generating it again. Because otherwise you're not gonna get all the classes that you get generated from JHipster. You're not gonna get all the Angular code, right? You need it to generate all that stuff. So I'm not gonna run Maven test again, but trust me, it'll work. And so after you do that, the last thing we're going to do is we're going to generate a Docker file. So the Docker file, and I'll show you more about that. So this is the command. If you see that -p, that's for Maven profile. So there's Maven profiles. The build acts a little differently if you're doing a production build versus a dev build. There's also a Spring profile. So that's for runtime. So if you're familiar with Spring profiles, I'm gonna get some water actually. You guys have water? Thanks. Excuse me. So those are two different things, but they kind of keep them in sync. So in production, you want to run this production Spring profile, and you want to use Maven production profile to do the builds. And in dev, you do regular dev builds. So we're trying to pretend like this is for production, so we're doing a production profile build. That's going to run all the unit tests, and it's going to create the Docker file and any supporting files that you need for Docker. So Docker is going to create, because we said MySQL, it's going to create a MySQL image, and then it's going to create one to actually run the microservice we created, this catalog. So that's done. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to make a gateway. So we just made a microservice. And the questions are pretty similar. I'll highlight where they're different for a gateway. Thanks. So here at the beginning, of course, you have to pick a gateway. Name, port, it's got to be a different port from the one you chose before. The registry, or you can use console. Jot again, SQL, MySQL, Maven. You can do some other things here that you couldn't do before. WebSockets, so there's support for WebSockets in JHipster. A lot of people can't use it because of firewall limitations, but the support is there if you want to play with it. I have a long time ago. I did like a little simple chat app with WebSockets. Then here is what I was talking about, where you could choose between Angular 4 and Angular JS 1. And eventually they're going to get rid of Angular JS 1. what happens is Julian, a lot of the people, when you first install JHipster, you can say, will you report statistics? And if you can, please do, because that's what Julian goes by to determine when features are kind of getting old and dead. So if enough people stop using it, then we'll just take it out. I'm going to use Angular 4. I'm not going to use a style sheet preprocessor. Sure, I'll support internationalization, but I'm just going to do English for now. Now, there's an extra option here on testing for front-end protractor. That's used for JavaScript, so obviously it didn't make sense for a microservice. No other generators. This one takes a little bit longer. So, the big difference between the microservice and the gateway, the microservices, there's no UI, right? So there's no need to generate any of that code, and there's no user management code. So JHipster comes with some user management stuff. You may or may not be able to use it. If you can't, just toss it aside, that's fine. It's pretty basic. It's just kind of enough to kind of get the app going for you. The gateway comes with all of these pieces. It comes with a router to the microservices, like a typical API gateway does. It does load balancing and circuit breaking. It does security, user management, rate limiting, and it generates your UI. So it does all of those things. Most of them, other than generating the UI, are using open source libraries. So JHipster itself is not actually writing this code to do this stuff. It's just kind of turning on these open source libraries. So I'll go into detail about what libraries we use. This might be a little slower over the MiFi. If you guys are not familiar with front-end development, we always say you download the internet, right? That's where you have to wait and download all these modules. And does anybody have any questions so far?
Yeah, sure.
Mm-hmm.
So this tool, should I assume that fits well in the waterfall model, where I have all my requirements are done well ahead. I know my design, I know my tables, I know all the stuff, right? So how does this fit into agile work? So initially you have something, vague requirements that doesn't even go beyond 2 sprints.
Right. So we've done the development we do is always agile development. We don't hardly ever do waterfall development. The way you can do it is you can still, maybe you only know about 2 entities at the beginning, but you can still go in and add more and more and more. The harder part is changing them. There's actually, I'm not going to go into it in this demo, but it's using Liquibase. And if Liquibase has this cool feature that you can use called Liquibase diff.
Sure.
So you can go in and, so the first time through when you generate these entities, it generates a Liquibase file, which is just XML that says create a table with these fields in it, right? So you can go into your code and add a field and run Liquibase diff, and Liquibase diff will generate another Liquibase XML file that just makes changes to that table to match what you coded. So if you say, oh, I'm going to add a priority, so like I created a trouble ticket. Oh, now I'm going to add priority field. You go to Java, add it, run Liquibase diff, it makes a Liquibase XML file. You just kind of point to that in your master Liquibase file, start the app again, and it'll add the column to the table. So there is support for Agile for requirement changes. You just have to be, I think part of it is, like I said, you kind of need to know the tips and tricks too.
Yeah, it's a given.
Don't modify as much as possible, try to extend what's there instead of modifying what's there. Just that'll help you when updates come from JHipster.
Yeah.
So it's taking me a very long time. I might have to switch to another.
T-Mobile.
I can switch to my phone if I have to. See if mine's any faster. Oh, I only have 1 bar.
Yeah, cell signal here is challenging.
2 bars. Let's see if this helps. trouble with live demos. No signal? Yeah, that makes it harder. Let me try to kill this. You can see all the different modules that get downloaded. And if you're used to Angular applications, you're used to, it's like a million lines of code that you don't write that come into here. All right, we'll look at the slides. So the next step is going to be to generate a Docker image just like before. It's the exact same command. And the only difference is on the gateway, we also have to compile the TypeScript, and we also have to run the unit tests on the JavaScript side as well. So, and if you're writing JavaScript, you should be writing unit tests for JavaScript if you aren't by now. In this case, like half the app is in JavaScript, so just not write unit tests for that. It's kind of like just not testing half your application. So I strongly recommend that. Looks like the same spot. All right. I'm gonna roll with it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the details of the pieces inside of the gateway application that's generated. The routing is done with something called Netflix Zool. So if you know Ghostbusters, you might know about that. And load balancing is done with Netflix Ribbon, and Circuit Breaker is Netflix Hystrix. So those things are all just straight up Netflix OSS libraries that are in use here. One of the cool things about JHipster is not necessarily that it's bringing all this code to the table, it's just putting all these pieces together and making them work so you can see how they work. And even if you're not going to actually do a JHipster application, it's good to look at, right? You can do security with the JOT or OAuth 2, now with the key cloak. And if you don't know about Swagger, that's a pretty cool thing that I'm going to show you, assuming I can ever get the UI built. And that is documentation that gets generated off of the controllers, the REST controllers, that allows you to see all the REST endpoints you have in a pretty cool format. And then the rate limiting is done with this library called Bucket4J. So that's an open source library that's out there. It also works with Hazelcast. So if you have some backend server, your microservices hitting some other service and it can't take so much load, you can limit the rate on that as well. And let's see if we got any more progress. Man, stuck there. Maybe I'll switch it back to the was that T-Mobile?
Yes.
I'm probably hurting it by changing back and forth. Okay, so in the meantime, I'm getting ahead of where I normally am, but I'm talk a little bit about the registry. So the registry is something that's generated by JHipster as well. It's its own open source thing, so it has its own GitHub repo separate from core JHipster. And the registry is pretty much a wrapper around Spring Cloud Eureka and Spring Cloud config. So Eureka for Spring Cloud, Eureka is just Spring's wrapper on Netflix Eureka. So the deal behind the services are, the registry is, the registry, you don't go to the registry and say, hey, add a service, add a service, add a service. The services add themselves to the registry. So every time you set up a microservice, you have to configure it to point to the registry, and it will register itself. So that makes it easy when you need to add a new one. You add a new service, and it registers itself, and next thing you know, now you have two services, and the load balancer automatically goes between them. And if one fails, no problem. You just keep on trucking. So that supports the scalability, where you can just bring up as many instances as you want, live, real time, and the front end doesn't know the difference. And the configuration is using Spring Cloud Config, so that's what I was talking about, where you have a single place for your configuration, and all the pieces, the gateway and services use the central configuration. So, and then the default way you do that is with GitHub. And one of the things that Julian had said is it allows you to put sensitive information like database passwords in your config. I still wouldn't necessarily recommend that. I would recommend more like, you could put it in like a private GitHub repo, I guess, but putting it in GitHub scares me a little bit. I would recommend like a Vault or some other tool like that to do that.
You can try our guest Wi-Fi if you want. Go to guest, HCSC guest INF. Do you see that?
Mm-hmm.
Blue cross, all lowercase, all one word. Open a web page. Click I need a guest account. It's towards the top right. Yep. Type in my name, M-A-R-K, space K-R-K.
Oh.
A-R-D-I-T-O.
Did you say ARD?
A-R-D-I-T-O. Wait for it to stop spinning, maybe.
That's not a good
There we
sign.
go. Yep.
I just put in all this stuff.
Yep.
Nobody spam me, please.
It's fine, one day, it's fine.
Oh, you have to do something?
I'm rejecting your request. That's confirmed.
I just got an email. All right, so do I have to log in again, or?
No, you should be able to, there you go. Just try and go into like yahoo.com now or something.
Yahoo.
Ah,
For Yahoo's done.
Nice on it.
You should have an email with your username and password.
not the smoothest demo of you, though.
Blame it on the internet. Is this Wi-Fi registration a microservice?
There you go.
All right. One more time.
Yeah, you can just-
Does look faster. As long as we don't get blocked by some sort of firewall rule. Sometimes you can when you're downloading these modules. You have to go to GitHub repos.
You know that thing, because the firewall blocks everything from NPM in here.
Oh, do you?
Yeah.
Is the dot spinning faster? Can you tell? Hey! Hey! All right, back on track. Back on track. Okay.
Wi-Fi for the win.
So what we have to do on the front end side is we generate the same product entity that we did on the back end, but what it's going to do is going to ask us, oh, do you want to generate this off of the back end entity? And you say, yeah, I do. And you say, okay, well, where is that? That's in this, and then different directories. So you say here, and you say, yes, I want to regenerate that. It's going to say, do you want to overwrite some files? Because it's going to actually change the menu in the JHipster app so that it adds an entity. Now it's going to have one called product. So you say yes, all to that. And more magic happens. Normally I would jump to slides, but I've already gone ahead to the slides, so I have to wait for a second. All right, and then the last step, which is making the Docker file. That one does take a few minutes, so I'm gonna go back. So we talked about the registry. The other piece is the console. So the console is basically the Elk stack. So as I mentioned before, it aggregates the logs from all the, so the gateway and any of the microservices you make will all go to the same central location. And I'll show you some of the cool dashboards that come with it. Just some cool little, and it's more like to wow your boss, and you would probably make your own. But the logs are sent using Logback API, if you've heard of that. And there's another thing in there called Drop Wizard. I don't know if you've heard of that, but Drop Wizard will print actual metrics to the logs. So when you're looking at, JVM metrics and things like that, where you would think, well, how from this central place am I going to go out and put agents on all these machines to check? No, all the servers, all the microservices and gateways, you can have more than one, will push their stats to this central place. So you can see all their JVM stats here using Drop Wizard. And there's also alerting available. So if you want to get some kind of notification if the memory use goes too high or processor goes too high or whatever, you can get that from Yelp using Elastalert, which is an open source tool from Yelp. The last thing we're going to do is now we have a microservice and we have a gateway. So we just need to get all the other pieces that I talked about. We need to get this registry built. We need this console, the Elk stack. So we're going to run JHipster Docker Compose, right? It's going to ask if you want to use the Elk stack for monitoring, or I think there's another thing called traffic. That's something new they've added. I haven't played around with that yet. And or you could just say I don't want to do that feature, and it won't put it in there. All right, that was much faster. So I'm going to make another directory called Docker Compose. So when we run the Docker Compose subgenerator, it's going to say, are we talking about a monolith here or a microservice here? So we're talking about a microservice. And this is the traffic gateway you can use instead of Netflix Zool. So I'm using Netflix Zool. And then you tell it where the microservices are and the gateways are located. In my case, I go to the root one down. So it'll give you a list. So if you have 5 microservices, they'll all be listed here, and you just decide which ones you actually want to deploy in Docker. And I want to deploy both, so I'm going to pick both. Okay. Here's your choice of monitoring, and this is the Elk stack if you want, or you can Prometheus, which I don't know anything about. That's pretty new. And then there's some new things also to help you. There's a curator, and it's cool. I like to give you a little definition here to tell you exactly what it's for. Okay, curator, what's that? It helps you curate and manage your Elasticsearch indices. Okay. Or Zipkin for distributed tracing. I haven't played with that, but it looks really cool where you can kind of trace your code all the way through all these different components for debugging. So. And I'm going to use a super secret admin password, admin. And that's it. It's generated the files for me. So now we have a bunch of Docker files for our gateway and our microservice and the databases for both. And now we have files for the registry and the console, so all of those things, right? And I don't know, I'm not a Docker expert, I'm not even close, but just a few little tips if you're playing around with Docker. And this is Docker for Mac. I don't know if the Windows one is pretty similar. A couple things you want to do if you're messing around with Docker. One thing you want to do is you want to bump that up, the memory. It defaulted on mine at 2 gigs. That's not enough. You're not going to be able to run all of these containers in 2 gigs. So 8 gigs is fine. And another thing you're going to want to do, it'll tell you if you forget, is you want to share the directory to Docker where you've put this stuff. If you don't, Docker can't access it. And it'll tell you, it'll say, I can't access the directory. I'm sorry, I can't bring these images up. So there's a couple little tips on running Docker. The Docker for Mac comes with this cool thing called Kitomatic. So it's like a little visual tool to show you your Docker containers. So you can see here, all these Docker containers have been spun up, and they're still working right now. JHipster doesn't look very good, the logo, but this thing is gonna, what happens is the registry has to come up first. Because everything wants to connect to the registry, you have to have the registry come up first. So there's just an artificial delay on the catalog and the gateway to wait 30 seconds. So that's enough time to get the registry up and running, so you need to have that in there. There's probably a slicker way to do that, but that's what we have for now. So this gives you all the logs for all the different containers. You can watch them as they come up. So a pretty cool tool. So now, to actually show you the app. So there's going to be 3 main ports being used by default. You, of course, can change all this stuff with config. The first one is JHipster app itself, the front end. The second one is your registry. And the third one is your console, which is your Elk monitoring, right? So the default port for your web server, your web app is 88. I don't think I can quite go there yet. It's not quite done. Mm-hmm.
So the registry, is that something you keep? You talked about using JHipster to generate and then forgetting about it. Is the registry something you keep as you throughout the life of the app?
Yeah, the registry is just it's like almost like a separate thing that you just run, and it stays up all the time. And you can have multiples for failover or whatever. and then all the apps that come alive are going to register with the registry. So it's still an open source thing. It's still like related to JHipster, but in reality, you could have your own registry and it would be fine. You don't need to use this one. Or you could just have a plain Eureka registry, not the JHipster branded one, which is effectively Eureka. So yeah, you keep that up all the time, and it has to be up and running or the app will not start. With the way it's configured, that's kind of the bonus to dynamically adding. Yes?
What does the console do?
The console, that's basically the Elk stack.
Okay.
So I'll show you, it's Kibana basically on the front end. All right, so here we're going to show the actual app. So if you've never seen a JHipster app and you're wondering what does a fresh JHipster generated application look like, this is it. You go, wow, this is not at all what I want my app to look like. Well, that's fine. You got to customize it, of course. But this is what you get, and the default app is responsive and all that. I'll show it. First, I'm going to sign in. Also, don't forget, you probably want to remove the admin user if you go to production of JHipster. It's a little tip. So now I'm logged in, and you'll see that the product that I generated is here in the menu. If I generated 5 of them, they would all be here, right? Very exciting screen. But let's see, I was going to show you that this is a responsive, it's bootstrap, all that jazz, right? All right, so you get a product screen, doesn't look very exciting at first. This is an Angular 4 screen that was generated based on the product that I made. So I'm very exciting. And of course, if I had said I want validation here required, then it would enforce that on the front end here as well. So there you go, it just generated a row in our database through the microservice. And these screens are all generated, of course, and the edit screen is generated. So like I said, you may not be able to use this as is, of course, but this is a good starting point for a lot of applications. You can view here. So here's some other cool things that you get with the JHipster application. Most of these things are things that kind of come with Spring, but they're just all kind of packaged here together, nice and easy for you. You can take a look at the gateway health. If you have more than one server, it would be here. This is the user management I mentioned. That's kind of basic. So these are the default users. You can add users here. You could modify the screen, do whatever you want to do. Yeah.
So I assume if you open up your IDE and start making edits there, that it should update the UI for you as well?
Yes, so when you run Yarn, there's this thing called browser sync. So browser sync will make it so that, and it actually works on both the front end and the back end. So the back end is using the Spring Boot dev tools in dev mode. If you go in prod mode, it turns that off. But in dev mode, it uses Spring Boot dev tools, and if you make a change to a Java file and hit save, it doesn't do a full restart, but it refreshes the app automatically based on your compile, basically. Not save, it would be a compile. As soon as you compile, then it's going to automatically refresh on the back end. So you don't have to stop your server and start your server. On the front end, it uses browser sync. You make a change to a TypeScript file or whatever, then it'll automatically transpile that and redraw the screen, refresh automatically. What happens is when you run Yarn from the command line, it'll open up a browser for you, and it'll go to like port 9200 by default instead of 8080, and that is now connected with browser sync. So if you make changes, then they'll just refresh. Another cool thing about browser sync is if you have to do multiple browser testing for your application, you can have IE, Chrome, Safari all open at the same time in browser sync. And whenever you click in one, it does it in all of them. So you can kind of see what they're all doing. You might want a bigger monitor. Tell your boss you need a bigger monitor so you can have 3 browsers up at the same time, or whatever. These are some of the cool metrics that you get. My favorite metrics, there's some JVM metrics here. My favorite are the ones that there's timings on all the service calls. So you can see how many times the service is called, how long does it take on average. So you can kind of look and see, oh man, this service is taking way longer than the others. What's up? Is that for real, or is that a problem? There's this health check built in. It will give you health check. It'll check, disk space, database connectivity, things like that. You can take a look at your configuration. So if you don't want to go out back to your source or whatever and look at, or go to GitHub if you're using Spring Cloud config, you can look at your configuration here. There's some built-in auditing. It's very, very simple. It's just authentication, success, and fail. But you could build off of that and add your own auditing if you want, or you can just ditch it if it's not for you. This is a cool feature where you can change the log level on any of your packages live. So if you are having trouble and you wanted to troubleshoot a particular package in production or whatever, you could flip it over to trace just to momentarily live change it and watch the logs. And here's Swagger. This is awesome, I think, if you haven't seen it. So Swagger has gone in and it's just found all our REST endpoints and put them out here on this page. And you say, oh, okay, I got an account REST endpoint. Oh, these are all my live connections to that endpoint. And these are my gets and posts. And then you can even go into detail and it'll give you an example. It'll tell you about the response codes that you can get, and you can even try it out. A real call, it gives you the curl for it, it gives you the response body. Very, very cool. So if anybody else wanted to call your API and you're like, where's your documentation? Go look at Swagger, it's up there. You can try it. So, cool stuff. And there's a couple little minor things it gives you, like you can change some user settings. Of course, this is more about for you to modify and add to if you wanted to do your own thing. And there's a little password tool and has a little thing that checks your strength or whatever. Ooh, that's not strong. I can't even make it strong. I'm going to put in some symbols. Oh, there we go. Anyway, so that's JHipster app. Then the other thing is the registry, right? Remember my password? Admin. So the registry here gives you some kind of overall information about the health of the registry itself. And it'll give you list all your instances. So it has the catalog microservice and it has the gateway service right there. And as we add more instances, they would show up. They would show up here. So if I add another catalog, which I'm about to do, you'll see it'll be 2 out of 2. And if I take, so you can get a little snapshot view and then if you have actual more than one registry, which I would recommend, they would be shown here as replicas. This is a little screen that shows you Spring Cloud configuration, the central config. And there's some, you can do SSH keys. And it has, the registry itself has all these same JHipsters, built with JHipster, right? So it has all these same functionality here. The difference is you can actually go and select from here the different pieces and see their individual statistics here. And last but not least is the console. Okay, so if you've never seen Elk Stack or Kibana, this is what Kibana looks like, just raw. This is just raw information coming in and being indexed. Over here are all the things being indexed off these log messages, and you can pick these things and sort them out and say, I only want to see this, or different search parameters. It's a very cool tool. You can take time frames and box them out here, and it'll just show you that time frame. Cool stuff, right? And one of the things that JHipster gives you is just a nice little bonus are these little default dashboards, just to give you an idea of the kind of stuff you can do with DropWizard and Elk Stack. And you can do all these cool graphs about logs, your JVM total memory, JVM heap memory, non-heap memory, memory ratio, JVM threads. So you can get all that off of the DropWizard metrics in graph form on one dashboard. There's another one that's just about the logs. So it gives you some graphs on the login, and it gives you kind of a prettier format to look at your logs. if there were any warnings, they would be blue here. So that's a pretty cool feature. Just the little dashboards, something you could just start with and then modify to whatever you need. And there's a bunch of them. I won't go into all of them. All right, almost done now. So the last thing I want to talk about is scaling and how easy it is to scale. Now that we have everything running in Docker and Docker containers, a command, super tricky, Docker compose scale catalog app 2. That'll bring up another instance of catalog microservice, and that's all you have to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do that first. Now I could have picked another number 2, instead of 2, but I'm going to go with 2 for now, right? So this is going to create another container. You can see it over in Kitematic. You see that, as I mentioned, there's that 30-second delay. So this is waiting 30 seconds because it thinks it's waiting for the registry to come up. After that 30 seconds, it's going to start this new catalog instance. So when it does this and the new catalog instance comes up, it's going to use the Hazelcast distributed cache and automatically join that cache and share it with the other instance. It also is going to be available in the registry. It's going to register itself and will show as soon as it comes up. I'll go to the registry, hit refresh, and you'll see there's 2 catalog and you have 2 different instance IDs running. And it'll also automatically start logging to the elk stack. So one of the things we think is cool to play with is just mess around with bringing up some instances, maybe start using it in the app, then kill one and see if everything's fine, and everything will be fine. And the last little bit here is if you want to get rid of all this stuff. These steps that I run through the demo, I have out in GitHub, and I'll show you that when we're done, so you can run through the steps yourself, exactly what I did. And so I leave Docker Compose down in there so that you can clean up when you're done with all this stuff. Let's take a look. Oh, looks like our new catalog guy looks like he's up, so let's go back to the home here. Oh yeah, look, we have 2 catalog microservices now running, both active. See, we got 2 out of 2. Those are the instance IDs for the 2 different catalog microservices. And if we go here and we say, we look at the logs, now we got a new row, new column, for logs. Okay. I'm having another demo error. Usually the 4th one pops up here, but it showed up on the logs. But what happens normally is the new catalog instance will show up here in this graph, just dynamically like that. So that. So conclusion, my opinion, hopefully yours too. This stuff is pretty cool. And I mentioned it earlier, even if you can't use JHipster, you already have an app and it's huge and it's already built and you're like, well, I'm just not starting a new app anytime soon. That's okay. Give you a real life example. I've had an app and we just wanted to put in pagination. And I was like, man, I don't know the new patterns for doing pagination. Let me just spin up a JHipster app, select pagination, and copy what they did and put it in my app. Nice. Right? So for learning. Also, I think it's cooler for learning, say you want to learn Angular 4, and you don't want to just do the tutorial, which is cool for like a super, super simple thing, but you want to see something a little more real. You can make a JHipster app that's got some entities and things like that in there and actually see a real app with how people normally structure it. The JHipster guys, the crew that really contributes to the source, they're very much up on all the standards that people are using, and they have, if you go look on the issues log, you'll see nice lively debates about, why we chose this, why we chose that. And sometimes it comes down to the guy with the code wins. So you have a debate and the guy's like, I don't like this. And the other guy says, I don't like it either. And he says, I want to do this. And the other guy says, but I want to do that, and I have some code. That guy probably is going to win, right? So sometimes they may not pick the super theoretical, awesomest idea. If somebody's willing to come to the table with some code and get something working, they might go with that. But there's a lot of debate, and they seriously think about all the different organization of how everything is organized and all the tools that are selected in the open source products. And they don't just go pick, Bob's garage thing that he built and he's the only guy committing to it in GitHub, So, and the final point, which I was trying to illustrate there at the end, is that microservices can scale easily with Docker, so that's kind of independent from JHipster. But the idea is, and people ask me, well, I don't want to go to command line to add an instance to Docker. Add another Docker instance. Well, yeah, of course. In production, that's not how it would work. You'd use something like a Docker swarm, or maybe you have your cloud, like say AWS, you have all the scale groups. Their idea is to monitor certain things, and if the threshold gets to a certain point, it kicks off a new instance, right? So you still need that. That's kind of outside the scope of this. All right. Do you have a question?
Yeah. So what happens if you change the application itself? Because we will Docker files, right? So what happens if you change the app code itself? Will it reflect in the the actual UI, or how does that work?
What happens if you change the app itself?
Yeah, the code in the app, will that reflect in the output? Because you build a Docker image, right? You build a Docker compose and
Right.
set up the containers. So you need to stop all those and then build it.
Yeah. If you change the gateway, then yeah, you're going to need to regenerate the gateway Docker image and deploy that. So that's part of the thing with Docker, right? It's cool that you can take something and kind of build that container and push it all the way through your pipeline and use it. But yeah, there's no changing it, right? As far as I know, like I said, I'm not a Docker expert, so somebody can correct me if there's some cool way to do that. But I think you have to generate it again and push it through your pipeline again. And there's a lot of other stuff I didn't cover about JHipster, CI/CD, like Jenkins and things like that. I didn't have time, but so another talk for another day. Other questions?
Is that Julian?
That is not Julian. A lot of people ask if the JHipster guy, I don't even know who that guy is, but if the JHipster guy is based on Julian, he's not. And if you want to know the real story behind why it's called JHipster, he actually originally, our company is Ippon, right? He actually originally was going to call it Ipster, and it got confused along the way, and somebody said hipster, and then that's what they went with. And another thing I've learned, in France, I hope I don't offend anyone, in France, hipster is really cool. Here, depends on who you ask, right?
Right.
But so they would, their marketing materials sometimes would be like, be a hipster, join Ippon. We're like, in the US, I don't know. So cool cultural stuff with an international company. Any other questions?
Thanks
All right, thank you.
That was good save too, right? With the Wi-Fi.
That was rough.
Thank you
All right,
guys.
thanks everyone, appreciate it. If you are interested in what opportunities are here at Blue Cross and you want to check it out, go talk to one of the Blue Cross people. They give you free health insurance. No, I'm just kidding. Your deductible's much lower than normal. Thanks everyone.
So let me ask you guys a quick question. How many of you guys don't have IntelliJ and would like to have one?
You mean the ultimate?
Yeah, the ultimate. It's a $150 one. So
Sure.
I'm gonna have to choose two.
Or do you got two?
I'm gonna choose you. Okay, you. Please come on forward and provide me your email addresses. Better luck next time, guys.
They give them away every meeting, so.
Yeah.
On to the next one.
Roman says.
Yes.
One, but it's not working.
Oh.
No, I gave you two already.
Just let it go.